I'm gonna do the courtesy and warn you all now that the next 10 minutes is me going to be gushing over Dandadan because I love the manga, I'm very happy with where it's going, and I'm excited for its future. I'm also gonna mention Chainsaw Man because the two are inherently linked thanks to the author of Dandadan being an assistant of Fujimoto and having a lot of influence carry over from Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man to Dandadan as a narrative experience. If that interests you, stick around. I do want to thank you all, however, for all of the amazing support as of recently. I truly appreciate it. It means the world to me and I love making videos. So hopefully they're entertaining enough. I do my best with the very small amount of time I have. But regardless, thank you. And there may be a podcast soon. So the most vital, important thing that I want to talk about that all of you need to know. Dandadan is really good. It's brilliant. It's fun. It's lovable. I don't really know how you can hate it, but if you do, that's okay. That's entirely up to you. For me, however, I enjoy it. It's taking all of the fun, chaotic elements of Chainsaw Man, turning it up tenfold, and then adding aliens and curses alike. In the most simplest of forms, that's basically it. When you start to break apart Dandadan as a story, however, there's some really surprising things here that shouldn't necessarily work as good as it does. See, I think every author wants freedom and flexibility, but the difficult thing with freedom and flexibility is that there's barely any consistency. So as an author, you have to try and find that consistency. Obviously, you want to make your readers feel comfortable. As soon as you start making them feel uncomfortable, obviously something's wrong. Either you've gone too far in this direction or that direction that feels very out there. If you want to do stuff like that, you got to make your approach a little bit more manageable, a little bit more digestible. Dandadan, with how severe it gets, how crazy and wild, you would think it would be impossible to get readers to be comfortable in this type of thing. However, there is a very easy, powerful weapon that authors will use all the time, and why weekly manga has kind of a subtle benefit to it: consistency. You read anything consistently, you will start to understand and feel comfortable with the narrative experience, how it unfolds, how it's told, how information is presented to you, and how it's drawn overall. When you start getting comfortable to that idea, which ultimately I don't think takes all too long, it's going to be dependent on each person, you're going to start to enjoy the overall story a lot more. Let's say you're reading a really slow story and you love it, you think it's great, and you finish that and you start the next story, which is super fast and handles its information so wildly that you feel like you can't keep up. It's because of that transition. Your prior work and what you were used to is obviously influencing the new work. So it may take some time to build up momentum to match the rhythm of how the story is meant to be read. Naturally, this is where a lot of people lose interest because of that first impression. If it's not hidden straight from the get-go, a lot of people are just gonna click off. The reason I mention all of this irrelevant things is because Dandadan has a rhythm that is unlike anyone else. The closest thing you could mention is Chainsaw Man, and it's because of that past assistant history. They used to work with each other, and a lot of Fujimoto's authenticity and identity has imprinted itself on Dandadan's narrative. It's very noticeable. But that doesn't mean Tatsu as an author doesn't have their own identity, because they very much do. And you can see it within how well they're able to handle so many different ideas and components mashing or conflicting with one another. These two components shouldn't go together that well, yet somehow Tatsu finds a way to make it work. And it's usually by adding another component to build the bridge between them, and one that's consistent within Dandadan and constantly building two that I should mention. It's romance, which is light but very playful, and also its character identity. One of the strongest points of Dandadan's story is its individualism. Every character is so out there, is so memorable, is so identifiable. You could point them out in a crowd of 1,000 plus. And I love this approach to such identifiable characters because they become very memorable. They leave a mark on your brain, and sometimes you can't stop thinking about them. This is a pretty standard thing for stories, but usually is regulated to very emotional or powerful moments. Dandadan is just normal. Every single interaction that you get with these characters are so incredibly memorable. They just help you fall in love with them even more. And I can't tell if it's the millennial/Gen Z humor that Tatsu may have that is very much for the newer generation of readers and students, etc. But also the dialogue, the overall comedy, the facial expressions, everything is just handled with so much care but uniqueness for a newer understanding. You won't see this type of comedy elsewhere unless the author themselves is relatively young or are trying to go for this type of humor. Fun, energetic, full of life. What's not to love about Dandadan? I know a lot of people used to tell me that they find it corny, that it's a little bit over the top, and I think corny is a pretty disingenuous word. There's probably a better word there that I can't currently think of. You know, if you find it corny, that's fine. obviously the humor's not for you or the chaoticness of it all is not for you, that's perfectly okay, but I do think it's part of its charm. There's a sense of irony that comes with this story, that it knows that it's being too over the top. It knows that its humor is very much on the nose, playful in a lot of different ways, but I guarantee you the humor that you get from it, even if you don't like it, you've probably never experienced it before. If you have, it's either from similar obscure type stories or stuff that is very new in approach to trying to latch onto the younger generation. Now, with everything that I've said so far, just gushing over the manga, we should 100% be getting an anime soon, at least some sort of announcement. Not only do we have enough material to actually kickstart something, we also have the success there for it. The story is very popular, and I think globally it could be even more popular. Because it has that charm that I talk about, I actually think its global reception will be a lot bigger than a lot of other stories, but it's entirely dependent on the approach to its anime production. I think an announcement mid to late next year would be great, and then the release date of the anime mid to late 2024. Sounds very optimistic and copium heavy, but rather perfect, right? Who would be a studio that you think would nail this adaptation? There's always the standard ones, Mappa, Bones, Ufotable, etc., right? For me, I've been constantly going back to the idea of Studio Trigger. I look at their very small list of works that they've done over the years, which mind you isn't many, but are very personalized, very specific, have this sense of identity to them that I think taking the components out of all the stories and works that they've done and putting it into Dandadan would make for a brilliant anime adaptation that I think they would knock out of the park. Stylistically, narratively, color-wise, animation, humor, everything, really. I think they would be able to match the pace of what Dandadan represents itself as and really just elevate it and bring it to life tenfold. It feels like a manga that would benefit heavily off movement and emotion and music to take these scenes that are very funny within the manga, but adding that movement to it amplifies it much more. So in a perfect world, 2024 release date, Studio Trigger for a Dandadan anime sounds amazing. What do they need to avoid? Or what would they do differently to something like Chainsaw Man, for example? See, Chainsaw Man went for a different approach. Even though Dandadan and Chainsaw Man's manga are very similar in a lot of ways, they're also very much different. And when it comes to the anime adaptation of Chainsaw Man, they have gone even further with being different, with dialing back the chaotic moments. This is something that isn't possible in Dandadan. As soon as you dial back the chaotic moments, you lose the identity of what Dandadan is, right? Chainsaw Man went for something a little bit darker, a little bit more grounded, a little bit more methodical, and it elongates its scenes a lot more to draw a ton of emotion within. This works with Fujimoto's writing. The transition between point A to point B, comedy to darkness and severity and vice versa, is what Fujimoto is very prolific at doing, and it's part of his authenticity. Dandadan, however, does not have that same type of transition. It does have its serious moments, but they're very far and few between. They're not as frequent, so I don't think there's a way to build a quote-unquote serious telling of Dandadan's story as its core pillar. Instead, if they're able to get Studio Trigger to truly just play into the comedy of it, that should be its pillar. That should be its one and only approach, and then surround that pillar that is comedy with everything else. The severity, the emotion, the romance, the slice of life elements that it has within it, and just go from there. The beauty of the story is within that comedy that's shared between characters, how they balance each other out, and then the uniqueness of different aliens and curses alike. And even those alien and curses have humor and comedy attached to them as well, so if you can nail that down, I think you could nail an anime adaptation. And I think that goes back to Chainsaw Man opening the doors of flexibility just a little bit for anime adaptations to produce it. See, I guarantee they probably thought about doing Chainsaw Man the way the manga does it. Very playful, very colorful, very over the top, right? But that's not Mappa's motto. They don't necessarily go down that route. For the most part, Studio Mappa are very serious. The tone that they create is very heavy, and they do a great job with it. Trying to change what they're so good at to mimic the colorful playfulness of Chainsaw Man would feel a little bit off. But if you have a studio that is able to accomplish that playfulness, that colorfulness, why not go with that? Dandadan also has the positive and the negative of that. There's no real other way you could interpret the story. If you tried to make it serious, I don't think it would work. And maybe that's why it hasn't got an anime announcement yet, especially mimicking Tatsu's art style, which is very beautiful, very massive in scale. But the more I think about it, the more I talk about it, Studio Trigger just feels like the best option day by day. And I could see see it rivaling Chainsaw Man easily, but for a completely different reason. For this fun, chaotic reason that I feel like is a lot more easily accessible for people to fall in love with than what Chainsaw Man is. And that's not a fault on their manga or their anime adaptations, whatever it may be. That's just the general reception. I think a lot more people have an easier time falling in love with comedic shows, stuff that's very open and playful. And while Chainsaw Man has a massive pinch of that, it's not built from the ground up with that in mind. Dandadan's hopefully will be. And just on that idea alone, I think it would have a much bigger reach than a lot of people would expect. I think it would rival a lot of stories. Chainsaw Man, Spy Family, Kaiju Number 8 potentially, just everyone, and would boost its sales exponentially. To the moon, skyrocket them completely. At the end of the day, I want to see this series thrive. I want to see it do well. I want to see it get a beautiful anime adaptation that everyone can fall in love with, and I want to see it smash records and do massive numbers. One can only hope in the future that we get an anime announcement, but it's always great to see Fujimoto's assistant shine brighter and brighter by the day. I have rambled here for too long, my apologies, but let me know your thoughts. What studio do you want Dandadan to get? Are you excited for Hell's Paradise's anime? Are you happy with Spy Family, also Fujimoto's assistant? And how do you feel about Chainsaw Man? Regardless, it's great to see everyone within Fujimoto's vicinity do extremely well. I couldn't be more happy for all of them.